either in real time or you're watching later, and thank you for watching in either capacity. For those of you who are here wondering, do we record these events? Yes, we do, and you can access them on the TLC website and check those out later on. So if you're here in real time saying, my colleagues need to see this, and they should, well, you can direct them to it as soon as we download them and make them aware. I always talk about next week's events first. Next week, we're going to have a wonderful event called Teaching Without Prepackaged Course Materials, Open Educational Resources and Open Pedagogy. Colby Moorberg and Brian Linshield will be here. They'll also might have some other colleagues who are here as well, basically talking about how we can do some things to help our students learn without making them super expensive like textbooks tend to be. So that's going to be an awesome event next week. We also have the opportunity for you to earn a professional development certificate. One of my colleagues just dropped the information in the chat. So if you are a GTA or a faculty or staff member and want to get a professional development certificate through the Teaching and Learning Center, we have the opportunity for you to do that. Click that link. Let us know if you have questions. Also, if you're just not interested in promoting your own teaching excellence, but you want to help others do so too, you can apply to be a TLC fellow, and you can click that same link for information on how to do that. So those are my announcements. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our speakers today, Rebeca Paz, Karina Moncayo-Michel, and Graciela Berumen, to talk to us about microaggressions and their impact. I'm very excited about this, and our renowned speakers, floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, actually, it's good afternoon. The sun is still shining. I feel like it's morning. And so we are really excited to be here with you and to have this important topic of discussion. My name is Rebeca Paz, and I direct the Office of First Generation Student.
My name is Karina Moncayo-Michel. I am an administrator of student programs over at the Staley School of Leadership. Our third colleague is Dr. Graciela Berumen, and she's not going to be here with us today, but me and Rebeca are going to kind of take us through our workshop. She's an important part of our team, but we're going to have to check on without her. But I will go ahead and start screen sharing.
And Dr. Berumen, I believe she is in Garden City or Liberal. They're recruiting students today, so she wasn't able to log in at this time. Yes, I'm sorry. Is my microphone low for everyone? Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay. Some can hear me well, they said. I will add my volume up a little bit. Let me see. Oops, sorry. Okay, Kari, can you share your screen?
Yes.
All right. So before we get started, we would like to start with a land acknowledgement. And as the first land grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is historically home to many Native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized Native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska. So before we get started, we'd always also want to get started with some community agreements. The topics that we want to reflect on and explore require that we all bring ourselves and our humble selves. And then number one, we wanna make sure that this is confidential. Although I guess since we're recording, it may not be too confidential. But again, we want to really practice confidentiality. We really want to show respect for one another, listen to understand, be open to changing your mind, because this is where we grow. Because we may find out that we learn something about our own selves, and then we may want to change. Let's value one another's experiences. Own and embrace your own feelings. Participate, don't dominate. We like to get as much participation from everybody, and disagree without being disagreeable. Would somebody like to add some more to this? Okay. So our learning outcomes for today is to learn and reflect on the concepts of cultural competence and cultural humility, learn about microaggressions and their impact, and then reflect on how to respond to instances of microaggressions. So before we get started, I want to ask everybody, let's reflect a little bit on our why. What drives the work we do? Why are we here? So if you can put it in the chat, reflect a little bit about your why and why are we here? Why do we do the work we do? I care about student development and preparing. Thank you. Help students be successful. To avoid being microaggressive and to help students and colleagues recognize they exist. To want our students to do well, to impact their future. Thank you all. To learn about the impact of microaggressions and how we can adjust our behavior. Thank you so much. So now that we have focused on our why, and we have great wealth here, wisdom, and opportunity to make an impact, I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague who is gonna cover the next topic.
Okay, so we want to start our conversation by presenting two frameworks that you might be familiar with. The first is cultural competence. We may see this often in our everyday lives. We talk about this in higher ed often. So the goal of cultural competence is to function effectively and appropriately in diverse cultural settings. We want to have an understanding and appreciation and respect of cultural differences and similarities within and among between groups. With a reaction with hands, have you heard of the term cultural competence? Great. Awesome. So cultural competence. The next thing that we're going to talk really quickly about is cultural humility. So cultural humility states no end point and the lifelong process of self-reflection and understanding of our own beliefs and identities with a commitment to engage and learning about others. So based on the two definitions that I've given, what are your thoughts? Just quickly, thoughts, differences that you notice between cultural humility and cultural competence. And feel free to unmute yourself. We love to have conversation in our workshops.
It seems to me like cultural humility might be the opposite or of anthropocentrism, which is kind of a negative term and something to also avoid.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. We have a little bit of, I think not division, but conversation, even within our group about the differences between the two. And, you know, is it a continuum? Is it one versus the other? We've had a couple of conversations about that. And I think it just depends on the way you perceive each definition and where you're getting them from. We have some conversation in the chat. Cultural humility appears to be more self-reflective, introspective versus a general appreciation and respect. You cannot have cultural competence without humility. Something that sticks out to me the most is a lifelong process. There's no end goal with cultural humility. Anybody else? La Barbara, I see that you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I see them in hand, but in a different spectrum.
Mhm.
So I think that part of what happens with us is that we don't necessarily have cultural humility.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't. So it makes it difficult to do the next step up, which you mentioned as competence.
Mhm.
So I think there's this sort of a balance that needs to happen. And too often people don't even really self-respect their own cultural heritage or understand it. So how can they actually have competence themselves? So that's kind of where I was.
Okay, thank you.
Patty, there's some comments on the chat too, I can read. It says, I think it's Karen, says, I think you cannot have cultural competence without humility.
Mhm.
Cultural humility appears to be more self-reflective. How then cultural competence is more like a checkbox thing. And cultural competence seems to regard others, whereas humility is about the self.
Mhm.
So can we talk a little bit more about checking the box? What did you mean, Dr. Bolton, checking the box?
Well, I think we often use cultural competence, oh, we're going to teach it. And I think cultural competence can be taught, but I think it's also it's an internal thing. And, you know, when we test for competencies, we test for it. That's why I think oftentimes it's used in a way that we check the box, we have cultural competence, where I think humility is a constant self-reflection of self and the other. I don't think it's only inward for humility. It's how we interact with others, with empathy and all the different things that come with interacting with people who aren't just like us. And we have to remember no one is just like us. You know, we have similarities, but we have a lot of similarities, but we often tend to focus on the difference. And I think that's where we start talking about competence.
Great, thank you for the dialogue and thoughts on this. We will move forward.
All right, thank you, everyone. So now that we have discussed cultural humility versus cultural competence, and so let's keep this cultural humility mindset as we work from it. And I think that Dr. Bolton really summarized it, that it's not checking the box, right? That this is a process and we learn about self and others. So we wanted to introduce microaggressions and the concept of microaggression and the impact of microaggressions. So as you can see it in the slide, the definition is right there. But what I wanted to bring you a little bit of the history. It was first coined by Dr. Chester Pierce in the 70s to describe subtle insults directed at African Americans. And then, since then, psychologists have expanded the definition to include behaviors targeting any marginalized group. And it was really Dr. Daryl Wing Sue that I feel brought this up to the forefront. I know when I started noticing this, I read some of his books. And so he basically says that these are everyday verbal, nonverbal, or environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional. So you can read it on the slides and reflect. And so what we learned about these microaggressions too is that they are usually outside the awareness of the perpetrator, but not necessarily. They can be delivered verbally, nor non-verbally, or through behavior. And most interestingly, it can be disguised as a compliment. Okay, so that's something to know about. So now let's talk a little bit more about how those are classified. So now that we know what they're all about, according to Dr. Daryl Wing Sue, microaggressions, they can be a micro insult. And that's when a person intentionally behaves in a discriminatory way while not intending to be offensive. Okay, so for example, oh, you speak such a good English, right? That would be for me, right? English is not my first language. Then we have the micro assault, and that's intentional and meant to hurt others. So it could be a joke that makes derogatory remarks or implications about a group. And then when you call them up, they say, oh, I was just joking. Yeah, I didn't mean it. Ha ha ha. And then we have micro-invalidation, which is a comment or action unintentionally discriminatory. And so what we're going to quickly show you a video of a micro-invalidation. And
by the way, I got in. Oh my God, where? Columbia. Congratulations. Thank you. How'd you get into that school? How did I get into that school?
I'm sorry.
Does she think I'm not smart enough?
Can anybody see the video?
No, okay.
Okay, so let's try again. I'm sorry. We just, first I thought somebody got in into Zoom. I totally got, somebody was late. Yeah.
1 second. Here we are. Can you see it now?
Yeah, but it's, we want to, yeah. Everybody can see it?
By the way, I got in. Oh my God, where? Columbia. Congratulations. Thank you. How'd you get into that school? How did I get into that school? Does she think I'm not smart enough? And don't bring up affirmative action. I've earned this.
All right. Is it still, yeah. So you just saw an example of a micro invalidation, right? Like you're not good enough, you're not smart enough. So keeping that in mind, what we learned about microaggressions, we're gonna move and go a little deeper into more the meaning of it, the intent, the impact, and also watch some more videos that really illustrate what they look like, and so that we're able to identify them.
Okay, so like Rebecca mentioned, we are going to be talking about intent versus impact. Just seeing these two terms, what do they mean? What is intent and what is impact?
Hi, this is Laverne. Hey, I would say those are two separate people or interpreting. One is interpreting intent and the other is interpreting impact.
We also have in the comment, intent is what we wanted from a behavior. Impact is what actually happens as a result of the behavior. Impact is consequences regardless of intent. Great. So generally we've heard these terms before, and everything that has been stated is exactly right. So we're gonna move on, and we're gonna watch a video, another quick video about language and microaggressions. One second.
It's so nice. Well, Karina plays that. I want to say it's so nice to have all of you here and engaging in this very important topic.
For some reason that video is not wanting to play.
Take your time. Is it not embedded, Kari?
No. Okay. Here it is.
Remember to share your screen. Yeah.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there
I mean, before that.
before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
I'm Shastina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
No, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. There, drop the balloon, do you? No. I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? Weird? Must be a Korean thing.
Okay, let me bring up presentation. Okay, so we got to watch this video. Has anybody seen this video before? Got some head nods, some hand raises. Yeah. I think it's a great way. Yeah. A great way to kind of showcase all of this that we're talking about. And so we kind of love this video to kind of give some great examples. So let's talk a little bit about the intent versus the impact throughout this, throughout the script, throughout the scene that we saw. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Ali has has a hand raised. Lower.
No, I'm good. Sorry.
So what would you say the intent was of the runner that came up to her?
I would say the general intent was to make conversation, possibly even flirt, but very clearly it went not the best.
Yeah. But would that I think you kind of seen it on her face, right? Whenever he said, "Where are you really from?" Right? So that impact of, what do you mean? Like, I told you where I was from. Other parts of the script that that was shared, or we want to talk about intent and impact.
The mentioning of the food, he just assumes that the food she eats is Korean and that she was exposed to all of that. And it's like, oh, I like your culture because the food tastes great.
Yeah.
I was going to say that may have been also the intent, is to show that you're culturally competent, to say, oh, I can pick you out. I know by the way you look and the way your physique or whatever, that I'm pretty savvy about knowing difference. And he was trying to suggest that by his comments. And then to make the comment about food as the only way to determine cultural difference.
Yeah. And then Dr. Ruben mentions in the chat, teriyaki is not Korean.
I have a question. For anybody just to see him. Why was he a regular American and she couldn't be? She had to reach back all these generations to show where her ancestors were from, but he didn't feel the need to until she pressed him on it. And then he thinks she's weird.
Mhm, mhm.
I think it's exaggerated to make it laugh, right? So we're all laughing because it's so dumb. But I think if you look at that and we're thinking of microaggression though, so isn't it an exaggerated way of you want to connect with someone and you know that they look different than you do, so you're going to call in all these things, but it's really offensive, and so I think that's what we would hope to get from like today's session.
Yeah.
That's so visibly dumb, but what if someone is just trying to say, hey, and if you said, hey, are you from here, and they that may sound offensive, but you really just want to know where you can go get your coffee or something, you know what I mean? Like, and it may be that you said it wrong, but your intent was never there. So
Yeah.
I think there's also another thing that goes on is then looks at physique or physical characteristics and makes assumptions. And this happens every day.
yes.
So I thought that was also very clear.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, back to what you were speaking on, Anne, I mean, these are everyday occurrences, right? Like Barbara said, and you can be in the workspace, in a meeting room, in the kitchen, heating up your food for lunch, and get like a offhand kind of comment, oh, I'm eating leftovers from yesterday, or ramen noodles, and sometimes, oh, you look like I bet you're a really good cook. You look like you're a really good cook. What from my environment that I'm in right now gives you the impression that I am a really good cook? Yeah, so, could be definitely taken in different ways, but none of the information that I have provided in this specific instance can tell you that I'm a good cook. Is it, what you're assuming my ethnicity is? Exactly.
But I think sometimes I think you have to know intent. You need to know someone, so you would know, like if you know me, you would know I would never, I'm not, my coworker and I are both listening, and so we, I'm not going to, we don't intentionally insult each other. We just work together because we work for K-State, right? So I think sometimes it's the intent and maybe wanting to make a connection, and then the leftover comment is just a dumb thing to say, but you don't, maybe that's where it's coming from. I don't know. That's just what I was thinking. I think we just have to we connect as humans at a basic level, and then it's what we look like or what our background is. Don't you think?
Yeah, and I think that's something that's great about the opportunities to have workshops like this, is continue to learn and grow, and how to move forward from that if I said something that was impacted differently than the way I intended it to be. So there's always opportunities to continue to learn and grow and continue to have conversations. Thank you.
Karina, I think the other thing that we're talking about is body language. That there's not only the verbal that comes out, but how the body gives off messages that may explain intent. So, I mean, there's language that's happening in multiple levels that we have to be aware of.
Yeah, and even in not just the words that are said, but the intonation of specific words, which can feel like it's a lot to think about, but I mean, that's why we're here, really.
I have one more comment to make that I'm not trying to dominate the language, the setting or anything. I also think that sometimes people ask a proxy question because they don't have the courage to ask the full question. I'll give you an example. Many people ask me what my maiden name is, and I always say, what are you really asking me? Why would you want to know my maiden name? What are you really asking me? And, you know, so I think sometimes we have to teach people how to be more honest in their approaches. But I want to go back to this whole concept of regular American. When I've asked students, what is your culture? A question, an answer I get more often than not, I don't have a culture. I'm just a normal American. And I always think, okay, that's a big phrase to unpack, because we should all see our cultures as normal, but not having a culture. I wasn't sure, maybe just didn't understand. Maybe they don't understand what culture is, but again, we have to be upfront with what we're saying.
But don't you think that also goes along when we talked about humility versus this, or what do you call this, like as you define terms? And I'm wondering sometimes if people say culture, I can point at a Hispanic culture or some other, because I know that, but I'm from Paxico, Kansas. You know, I mean, I'm like, what culture? But then as we redefine the word and we open up and we talk to each other, isn't my culture then small town or rural, or do you see what I'm saying? So I think it comes down to people understanding culture just doesn't mean, it means it's a whole different, the way we look at that word, don't you think?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if Dr. Bolton, you were gonna share here, but I think that there are many layers to culture, and it's not just food and language, but you know, where you grew up and how you're raised and what we think about maybe marriage and childbearing and all of those, you know, maybe things that we don't think about initially when we hear the word culture. Dr. Bolton.
Well, a lot of times people use it as if it's a proxy for race. Has nothing to do with that. It's our practices, our belief systems, all the things that were socialized in our family. And then when we get out into the world, we socialize in a different way, and we adapt to and adopt other cultures, other cultural practices. So yeah, it's how we use the word as if it means a nationality is mixed up that same way. It's simply the place of your birth, has nothing to do with your phenotype. All of these things that keep getting used interchangeably, but shouldn't be. We do that quite often.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that it then becomes what you look like, and that assumption is not necessarily true of people who look a certain way, because it depends on where they grew up and their family and all those family practices or communal practices that have nothing to do with what you believe that person looks like, which is another mistake that people make, that is race related in more than anything, or ethnically related. So
I would agree. And I would like to say this too, you know, I have 3 adult children and my kids are city kids. And they always say, I mean, no offense, Mom, but small town people are strange. And so do you understand their view? You know what I mean? They say, oh, and I'm like, yes, I get that. But anyway, so I agree with you. But don't you think it's now that we are, I feel like, you know, we've got a lot of problems in the world, but I feel like we're on our way to being more open. So shouldn't we help share what culture actually means? It's all those things that you said. It isn't what someone thinks. So then that's what I think. It's understanding the words you use, maybe.
I have a question. I grew up my husband and I and the rest of my family grew up in the Southwest. And so a lot of Hispanic culture, Native American culture kind of mixed in with other cultures. And so my sister, for example, she's in Albuquerque and she's very much immersed in New Mexico's traditions and festivals. And she got accused one time of cultural appropriation. She's an artist, and for Dios de los Muertos, she was asked to create by her friend, and she created one for herself and her friend, this big, beautiful headpiece. And then somebody pointed out and said, oh, that's cultural appropriation. So she still is like sitting on that question that happened years ago, and she still asks, is it? I don't understand, you know. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Somebody in the audience want to address that? I would think, is she Latina?
No, we're not Latina, no, but we've grown up in the areas and we, as being latchkey kids, we were raised by other families.
Okay.
And so we were raised by Hispanic families. And so it just never really dawned on her, being a part of all of these celebrations, that she was appropriating a culture. And then the person who asked her was Latina, to make the headpieces as well.
And I'm wondering if they felt because she didn't have those life experiences and it was not part of the culture, she was using it to maybe, I don't know what the purpose of it was, right? And so I would have gone back and asked more questions to them, but I can see that how they felt that it was a cultural appropriation if they didn't belong to the culture.
Yeah, and the person who was accusing her of cultural appropriation was a non-Latina, non-person of color. So it was a bit of like well, are you the correct person to be the one pointing that out also? And
I'm wondering, if they were learning, because I know that cultural appropriation has been talked about a lot and I hear about it. And sometimes to me, in some cases it's obvious, but in other cases it can just be, is it really? And Dr. Karin Goldberg put, I think that's a great question, was the boundary between appreciation of culture or and wanting to engage and appropriating it? That's the question. It's like, I know when my kids went to kindergarten and then the Thanksgiving comes and then a lot of them dress up as Native Americans, to me, that's cultural appropriation, right? And they have them because they had no idea. They just get to dress up one day and they pretend, right? And it's been used as a visual aid type thing rather than be part of the community and trying to educate. That would be my take on it. Would anybody else want to add this before we move on into the next? Because I know Karina has another set of questions, right? Because this is a very important question and maybe it needs to be a topic of itself, right? What is cultural appropriation and how do we do it without meaning? Because it can also be a microaggression.
I wasn't going to speak to that, but the former comment I had was that I always use the example that people who call themselves a particular faith going to a church, let's say they say they're Baptist or they're Catholic, I can bet you in that congregation, they all don't think alike. Mm-hmm. They don't have similar values, and their interpretation of the very faith that they believe in may be distinctly different. Therefore, they're a people group within the Catholic or the Baptist church, but they are different in some ways that therefore one can't make assumptions that they all believe the same thing. So I try to use that example to share with people how one may call yourself something, but that doesn't mean you all believe and share the same belief structure just because you attend a certain service or what have you. And it's the same thing then with how one looks and how one behaves as to whether you can make that assumption.
Thank you so much. Now, for the sake of time, this is a great conversation. I realize cultural appropriation could be another topic. Bounce, I'll see if we can make a note on that and explore more and learn. This helps me grow too. And so, Kari, I think we have another set of questions for the audience because I really want to get to the impact of microaggressions later on.
Okay, so yeah, thank you all for the conversations and the comments and the vulnerability. I think all of that is great part of this whole experience. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit more. How may microaggressions show up in the classroom, or how have you responded when a microaggression has happened and you've witnessed it? This will take a little bit of vulnerability again, and maybe courage to speak. But I feel like we've had a great conversation and dialogue thus far. And so I hope we can have some conversation around this.
I think kind of the most prevalent one that I've seen is just invalidation of experiences. Specifically, I've only taught intro psych courses, but during our developmental periods and everything, we talk about the menstrual cycle a little bit, and a lot of the women in class typically talk about the pain and discomfort that can come with that. And at one point I had a male student be like, oh, it can't be that bad, XYZ, and just kind of invalidating that experience that some of the female students have had. So kind of what wasn't the best time for that class, but we went through it and everything and wrapped back around.
Yeah. How did you respond to that situation as you were leading the class?
It might not have been the best response, but I kind of just went to the class and I said, do we have any, if I remember correctly, do we have any respectful counters, or do we have any respectful experiences that we can share that might continue this conversation or something like that? I don't remember exactly how I responded, but it was along that vein.
Okay.
Were there times when some of your students brought up situations when they might have faced a microaggression from another classmate that they might have shared with you? And if so, what would those look like? That would help us, I think, because sometimes it may be happening in the classrooms or in our work environments and we're not aware.
Again, silence can definitely be a response to instances when we've noticed them.
So I want to contribute two thoughts. First of all, I do think silence is a response, and silence sometimes conveys that we condone the behavior that happened in class. So I have heard a lot of people say, well, I didn't do anything in that situation. Not doing anything may actually encourage that situation to continue. So I do think we have to be careful regarding that. The other comment I want to make is that as you know, people in instructional positions, we're mandatory reporters. And if students bring to us, you know, an allegation, for instance, that they've been discriminated against, we kind of need to report that. So it is something where when we're having classroom conversations about this, if their actual experience is not hypothetical experiences, those kind of things, we actually do have some responsibility to get involved at that point. So just, you know, be aware of that as you start to engage in these conversations in your classes.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready for the next slide, Karin?
Yeah, we'll move on. There's some conversation in the chat, which I think is great. And I think it does take a lot to have like courageous conversations, to listen, to reflect and learn and teach when we can, you know, about the instance and the impact that our words have on a group or individual. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I know for the sake of time, I really wanted to get to this part because, you know, we've talked about microaggressions, we've talked about culture. I think we did a lot of exploring and what it means, but the impact is so important for us to understand, especially if you are not at the receiving end of these microaggressions, which we learned today that really happened to people from marginalized communities. And something for us to really remember that microaggressions are cumulative and they occur to people of color from, oops, sorry, I somehow lost my screen. Okay, I'm back. So they occur to people of color according to Dr. Su, who does his research on this, they occur from the time they awaken until they go to bed, from the time they are born until they die. So think about this, if it's daily and it just compounds or compounds. And when they happen casually, but may not have harm intended, and I know we spent some time about the intent, so nobody has bad intentions, but let's also focus on the impact. And then there's research that says that they can take a psychological and physical toll on people's health. And so what Dr. Su says is that for us, it's important to keep shining a light on the harm these encounters can inflict, no matter how the person of color decides to handle a given encounter, or no matter how the professor notices or not notices. We really need to shed a light. And what he says, and I'm going to quote, is my hope is to make the invisible visible, because it is invisible, right? We saw it in the video. The guy had no clue. The other video too, when she said, how did you get in Colombia? She had no clue, but she believes it. And basically microaggressions are also based on biases, implicit biases that we have. They show up, like I've done microaggressions, and they show up in my own biases, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I said that, right? And I have to autocorrect. And then he says, quote, microaggressions hold their power because they're invisible, and therefore they don't allow us to see what our actions and attitudes may be discriminatory, end of quote. So remember, they're invisible. So the next video we want you to watch, it has an impact of the microaggression. So let's think really about the impact more than the intent, and see what really it is for people who may just be getting tired of it at the end of the day. So thank you, Kari, for connecting us to the video.
They do the incredible. Help save lives. So can you.
1 second. I know you guys are not seeing this now.
All right, thank you. Impact. And I know Dr. Bolton said something about not knowing willfully excuses us from acting. Okay. Is this it?
Your CSL plasma donation can help create 24 life-saving medicines. Be rewarded for your generosity.
The ad first.
Save so many lives. Donate at CSL Plasma today.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem, oh, you're so well spoken. Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite. Ugh, it's a compliment. Mosquito bites and our itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while, where are you really from?
Cleveland.
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date.
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me? Going grocery shopping. Everything happens for a reason.
Just saying, yeah.
Commuting to work.
So when are you gonna have a baby?
Watching TV.
We have to keep the Redskin name. It's part of our culture and history.
Or just walking down the street with your partner. I couldn't even tell you were gay. Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere. John, shopping is so fabulous. Here too. And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day.
Touch your hair.
Multiple times a day.
Can I touch it? Can I?
It's fucking annoying. It makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes. It seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
Mosquito bite, who cares? Just another anger black.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years. Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major. And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
It looks like you was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time. You're so exotic. Oh. And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggression.
So any reactions to the video?
I think in some settings, in some communities, especially communities that are transitioning from one population to the other, you find these clashes where mosquitoes move in. I'll say it that way. And you hear those kinds of comments, not only on the street, you hear them with police, you hear them in the grocery store, you hear them between two people who are new to the neighborhood as the neighborhood is transitioning, especially in urban context. And I think that, and I've heard it a lot myself, but I think that it really depends on the situation of how much mosquito bites you would have in small communities where the intersection of different people may not come as frequently as there would be in other settings. And I think of films like Crash that really sort of exaggerated those moments of intersection between different people and the reaction of the actors in those scenarios.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Okay, you know the comment in the chat, I think it was Dawn, I'm not sure, when you were saying, someone said that they, like you're looking at it from the other side, right? Because I'm not a person of color. Do you know what's going to happen to everyone? Everyone ages. And as you get older, then you're going to hear those microaggressions too. Do you know what I mean? So in a way, it sometimes makes me want to laugh out loud when I hear them, because I'm like, that's so dumb and narrow-minded. But I think we all, like when you're listening to those, it's like when the mosquito bite happens, it stings, but it really just stings you, you know, but you'll remember it the next time. So.
Thank you. And I think that microaggressions can also, it can be with age, it can be with, you know, against women, with homophobia, and all these, when we are, you know, a population that is not necessarily mainstream. I know a friend of mine told me yesterday, somebody had always, they said that they always ask them, when are you going to retire? When are you going to retire? And I said, that's rude, right? And they just laugh. But I'm thinking, you know, what message does that give? So I have a couple of comments here in the chat. Dawn says, I like that it helps those who don't face them think about an analogous experience they can relate to. Yes. So every time I get a mosquito bite now, I think of microaggressions. I like when I get a real mosquito bite, it reminds me of this video. And Brandon says, I love it so much, and I will now start using this video. It shows how annoying these moments are to the point that having serious consequences. I know. And like Dr. Sue said, they harm and they cause physical, they create a psychological and physical toll on people's health. Okay, so let's make the invisible visible. Let's try to commit, because when I commit microaggressions, and believe me, I'm very guilty, I am so embarrassed and so ashamed, but I guess I need to have a growth mindset and try to fix it. Any other, one more last comment about this video, because we're almost running out of time, and I know Kari has to do a couple of more slides.
I'll speak up here and just talk about making the invisible visible when it comes to culture. I had an experience years ago at K-State where a colleague of mine was in charge of our diversity program within our department. And I made a comment about, well, yeah, we need to include talking about people like me. And she said, yeah, we can include people like you, and went on with her day. She didn't even ask what I meant by that. And it's a similar experience I've had pretty much my entire life. But look at me, I look like average white guy, but I actually come from a culture that's a minority culture, no matter where you look at it around the world. My father is Chaldean, and no one ever knows, because they look at me and I just look like, you know, all the white people that I'm around. You know, I've over the years, especially more recently, I've become a little bit more vocal about what my heritage actually is. And So I think we can't make the blanket statement about people of color. You know, certainly people of color are part of that, but there's other people too. I saw a video a few weeks ago about a Native American man. While he was similar to me, he was multiracial. He was part Native. His father or mother was Native, but he got all the white genes. And so, like me, he looked like just an ordinary white person, but he was just as much Native as someone with dark black hair and darker skin. And I think in the world today that we're living in, we can't just go off of face value. No pun intended there. And you know, we just need to respect people for where they are, who they are, and we need to understand that in America, we literally are a melting pot, and people might have heritage that's from anywhere around the world. And what a cool thing that is.
Thank you for sharing your story. And I would like to say, as you were saying, I had a lot of things come up in my mind. And Dawn, I'm thinking this, we can also have conversations about colorism and all these other layers and layers of discrimination. But thank you. So now we're going to go into the next slide, because I know we want to be very mindful of your time and engage in a little bit more of quick discussions.
Okay. So we're moving forward here towards the end of our workshop, and we want to know, what can I do to mitigate microaggressions? This is a question for the group, maybe to just think about. I think the first thing is to be aware of them. Think about the impact of the words you're using and how that can be perceived. I think that if you're here, it's because this is something that's important to you and something you want to learn about. We hear a lot of comments like, that's a lot of work, that's too much thinking, that's not what I meant. But we're here in a time where people are speaking up and sharing what these innocent comments are doing to everyday lives. And Rebecca shared a lot of that. We heard many comments in our groups. And so I think it's important to think, how can I move forward if this happens in the classroom or in the workplace? What can I do? So I hope you guys are able to take some time to think a little bit about that, either now or after this workshop. We'll move forward. Oops. One of the first steps is apologizing. If somebody comes up to you and says, you know, this comment that you made me feel this way, and this is how I perceived, you know, what you meant. This is a really great video called How to Apologize. Pretty straightforward. We may not always think that apologizing is something we need to practice or train in, but it can be surprising how many of us are just not good at apologizing or don't know how to apologize. So there's a lot of steps that she goes over in this video. And a few of the things that she talks about is take responsibility for your actions. Don't blame the person that was offended. Acknowledge what you did wrong. Don't try to tell the other person how to feel or how you made them feel. And I think the biggest point is making a commitment to change the behavior. That's something that I think we miss often, and we say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. And then next week, the similar comment is made. So there's a lot to learn and a lot to practice as we're learning how to be, I think, just better to each other in general. An example that I can just share quickly is of how to apologize is, I'm sorry that I said, insert microaggression. I now understand how that hurt you. I will do better in the future, and thank you for letting me know. It does take courage for somebody to speak up and say, hey, you know, that comment that you made about me being able to cook last week, you know, this is how I took it, and this is how it offended me. So, and then we learn and we educate ourselves. There's a lot of resources and here in the community and online that we can continue to move forward. So taking responsibility and making a commitment to change the behavior, I think, are two really big ones. Okay. So we're part of the solution. Do what you can, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. This is just one of our favorite quotes to use by Maya Angelou, and I think that's the premise of all of the work that we're doing.
Now, I think we ran out of time, but if you can stay for 2 minutes, if you can just think about the action behind the knowledge, and then we really want you to walk away with some reflection pieces, because we feel that this important topic is for us to all do better and to learn to do better until we know better. So if you can think of 3 things you remember from today's session, and then 3 things you can apply to what you learned, and 3 things that you can do for your development. And that would just be for you, not for us. We just want you to walk away with that and challenge everybody to make the invisible visible. I'll give you a minute, and then I know I heard the chimes too. And also, like Karina said, we're gonna, on the slides, we have and notes, we have the videos and all that if you want to have access to them, or you can always email us and we'll be happy to give it to you. And so there's 3 of us, and unfortunately one of them is doing work in she's in liberal, so sorry she wasn't able to be here. So thank you everybody for attending today. Let's talk about chat. Okay. So Dawn, did you want to say about let's talk about, you had a last
So I first want to thank you both for an amazing presentation. One of my takeaways from this event is we need to have more events like this and have more conversations like this. I especially like the video resources that we can now share with our students in our classes about these kind of things. So I want to thank you, and I want to have the group help me in thanking you, because we really appreciate your time today. I will remind everybody who's at this event, we do have a post-event survey. I'll also remind you that we have the opportunity to do, professional development certificates as well as fellow status in the TLC. And I also dropped in the chat information about an event by the Department of English that I thought this group might be interested in, given some of our previous conversations. They have a conversation about, let's talk about Chat GPT event. It's going to be a number of short talks about different aspects of Chat GPT. That is in Hale 181 at 2:30. There also is a Zoom link that I could not find very quickly, but maybe Ashley can find that in a second. She is nodding, and she'll drop that Zoom link if you want to attend by Zoom. But once again, I want to thank you all for attending today and engaging in this very important conversation.